Welcome. We are going to get started. First of all, thank you for coming to tonight's program. We originally had this scheduled in March, but we had to postpone because we had a snowstorm that week. How fitting, because the topic is on blizzard from January 1873. January 1873, Lyon County was just a few years old. The county was established officially when the commissioners met in August of 1870 in Lynn. January 1873, Marshall was a town. It was founded in 1872. There wasn't a newspaper yet. The Prairie Schooner wouldn't be published until later. And at this point, the county of Lincoln County was a part of Lyon County. It would be later when Lincoln County would be established. So Carolyn is going to talk about her book that she published about 2 years ago, a year ago?
Oh, last October.
Last October, so it's pretty recent. So she's going to talk about her book tonight. And she does have copies available for sale. And after the program, we do have refreshments over there. At any point, if you need to step out or use the restroom, we have restrooms right outside the door here. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for coming. I want to read you something that I found on the wall over in the exhibit area. The Lyon County landscape is full of drama. The farms and prairies are vast. The skies are wide open. Rivers tumble through towns, and terrible storms can blow in from distant horizons. So I am here to talk about one of those storms that came across from distant horizons. The storm was 3 days long, January 7th, 8th, and 9th of 1873. And people have asked me, how did I get interested in this storm? So I have had a family history website for many years, and we had a family reunion up in Candioi County, where I'm from, in 2016, and I decided to put that into a book form for the family. While I'm doing that, I find out more information about my great-great-grandfather, Gunter Sowinski, who was in this blizzard. And he took refuge with a neighbor at another neighbor's farm and stayed there for 3 days. And in the meantime, his wife, Gamina, was home with a little 1-month-old baby. And I cannot imagine what was going through her thoughts for those 3 days, wondering if her husband was going to be coming home or if she was going to be a widow with this young little baby. So, it's a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday blizzard. By Friday is probably when Gunter did make it home. So they had a joyous reunion. But there are many people in Minnesota that did not have that reunion. So that's what this book is about. In 2017, because I was learning about Gunter, I was also learning about others in Candioi County that died. And so I thought, well, maybe I could do a book. They say there's only 12 deaths in Candioi County. During the research, it was only 11. But I thought, 12 people, there's going to be an easy beginning and an end to that book, and it won't be so big. So I created Almost Saved But Lost, just about the victims in Candioi County. And the title, Almost Saved But Lost, is quoting the son of one of the victims, Klaus Strand, from Candioi County. And Jens Strand became a Lutheran minister, and he was back reminiscing. Oh, we lost this. Sorry about that. He was, as an adult, going back to the church that he grew up in and had taken another trip to the location where his father had died. And his father died, and his uncle, they died together, and they died very close to buildings and didn't see the buildings. So they were almost saved, but lost. So I did this book, and then in 2019, I'm realizing, the 150th anniversary, the blizzard's going to be in 2023. Maybe I could look at all those that died in Minnesota. Because as I was doing this book, I was finding literature that said, about 70 people died in Minnesota. And then another article would say 70 people died. The state of Minnesota had a list of 70 people. And then another publication said, oh, more people died in this blizzard than died in the Dakota War of 1862. So now we're talking a few hundred. And then another writer said, oh, 70 is way too much. It's about 54 people that died. So nobody knew. And I thought, I can use my research skills. I'm an archivist, I'm a historian, I've done a lot of genealogy research. Maybe I can figure this out. And using some of the same techniques for this. And so I started, and I sort of already had some names to begin with. And some of those names ended up being wrong. They died in a different blizzard, and then I added more names. And finally, I came up with 84 deaths. But I want to read you a little bit from the book about the description of the blizzard. And this is taken from many of the county histories as they've described the blizzard. Soon the sky became hazy. The front of the storm arriving from the northwest was distinct to the human eye and described as a great white sheet or a white wall. The midday arrival of darkness was described as a funeral pall hiding the noonday sun in western Minnesota. With the darkness came cold temperatures and penetrating winds from the north. The gale moved at 30 to 40 miles per hour. The temperatures dropped from 32 degrees to minus 9 degrees to minus 18 degrees to even minus 40 degrees. In some areas, the drop in temperature occurred within 60 minutes. Wind chills caused these temperatures to feel even colder. The air was filled with snow. Objects just a few yards ahead disappeared from view. Described like flour, this fine snow blew through every crevice, every nook and cranny, every keyhole, puffing into the houses like steam and settling on the floor and furniture in unusual shapes, sometimes substituting one for another over time. The wind penetrated through clothing. One could not face the strong winds and intense cold. Tuesday afternoon moved into Tuesday night, and then Wednesday, and then Thursday, with no cessation of the storm. The winds seemed to increase in severity by the hour. Homeowners feared that their houses would overturn in the storm, complicating an already dangerous situation. Stovepipes plugged at the top with snow and then glowed red hot, forcing homeowners to stop this warmth-giving fire. Homes grew cold and stayed cold, some with snow and ice inside. Families huddled under blankets and stayed in bed as much as possible. The winds did not start to diminish until Thursday, January 9th, and on Friday, the storm was over. Oops, there we go. I'm sorry for this. When I've got things on white, the images are a little weird. I'm sorry about that. So the yellow map is current. That is from last December when you had the blizzard right before Christmas. And the yellow areas are the visibilities of less than 1/2 mile. And you can see it's the prairies of Minnesota that are greatly affected by that blizzard in your long winter. And if you match it, or look at the map on the right, and I use that map a couple of times in the book, but it shows the prairie grasslands. Again, that quote from out here talks about the vastness, the prairies. It was the prairies that, of course, had the most difficulty in this storm because there really wasn't anything to block the winds. No, very few trees. Trees would be along the rivers and the lakes, but in general, it is the grasslands. And I must say, I was out doing some other talks earlier in the week, or last week, and my husband and I went to Jeffers petroglyphs. Oh my, the wind. I mean, it was already windy that week, but it was extremely strong. We were just sort of bending over trying to walk back to our car, and it was 90 degrees out. And I kept thinking, what was this like when it was 20 below and facing that kind of wind? And we had a car to go to. Yeah. So I just thought this, when I saw this map on Twitter, I just thought I've got to have that to describe, to compare the two winters. So the winter of 72-73 was very difficult for the farmers. It started with the first snow in October. The first snow in October, the first blizzard in November, blizzards in December and January, February, March, and the last blizzard on April 15th. So we've gone past April 15th, so you might be in good shape now. Anyway, so I read that description earlier. So you get a sense as to the difficulty of that winter. So I was fortunate when working on my Almost Saved But Lost book. I found these weather maps from January 7th, 1873. The U.S. Army kept maps, and now they are with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And these are available online. If you want to know what the weather map on a certain date, you can go to their website and plug in the date, and a map pops up. So I have 5 of these maps in this later book, The Great Storm. So this one is from the morning of January 7th. January 7th started out as a warm, above freezing, blue skies, calm, just gentle breezes. The low was sitting over Nebraska. And if you can see the isobars, they're a little faded, but they're coming up from the south. They are bringing the warm air. And people had been hunkered down because of that difficult winter so far. They finally had a warm day. They can start doing their errands. Many of the men were going off to get firewood. They were going to the rivers and the lakes. They were desperate for fuel for their homes. People went to town. One of the victims was going to get medicine for his father and did not make it home. People went to visit family and friends. There were just a variety of chores around the farm, just a variety of things that people do. And I call this sort of ordinary people doing ordinary things and getting caught in this intense blizzard. And it was warm, so they weren't protected for cold weather. They maybe didn't have their buffalo robes in the wagon to help them later on. They didn't expect a blizzard to be showing up. And so they were caught, many of them not having the proper clothing for a storm. And so now we're at 4:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday, the 7th, and the low is sitting over Minneapolis. And now you can see the isobars are coming down from Canada and bringing the cold air and winds. So there are 3 more maps in the book, and they show the low going over Lake Superior and then up into Canada. People died in Nebraska, Dakota Territory, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Canada, and maybe some other states. There's no definitive number for how many people died in those other states, and I am not taking on that project. Oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Okay. So here's a map of Minnesota where I've identified where the deaths were. Most of the people died in their own county, but not all. I've identified 84, and 30 counties. There are 82 deaths in 30 counties of Minnesota. And again, almost all of them are in the official prairie grasslands. One of them died in Dakota Territory. He was from Lac-Qui-Parle County, Duncan Murray. He had a farm in Lac-Qui-Parle, and he had just gotten property across the border in Dakota Territory, which is now like in Grant County, South Dakota. So he was there when the storm died, but he also had land, and he was buried in Lac-Qui-Parle. So I have him as a Lac-Qui-Parle death. And then one person, Foster White, Isaac Foster White, he died in Iowa, and he was from Martin County, and he just, in his disorientation, crossed the state line and died in Iowa. Part of the problem with this blizzard is disorientation. People would think they're going north, and they end up going east or south, or they'll go in circles and don't know they're going in circles. The wind is described like a hurricane, so it's somewhat circular. People have snow and ice in their eyes. They cannot face the wind. It's extremely cold, and then hypothermia sets in. And when you have hypothermia dropping your temperature, your sound reasoning also diminishes, and you start making decisions that you normally wouldn't do, but your thinking is not quite clear. The book does have a description of hypothermia and what happens to the body. All right, so the state of Minnesota responded with some financial help for the victims and their families. So if you lost the primary breadwinner primarily, you would get the widow would get $50. Not all of them did, and it's not clear why some of them only got $37.50 or $40 and not $50. And if you were injured, like amputations, you got $25. But the medical bills the state paid for, the hospital stay or the doctors who were doing the surgeries, the families did not have to pay the medical bills. And widowers applied if they lost the wife. And sometimes they got money and sometimes they did not. And Stephen Zutz, he was the widower of Henrietta, who died in the blizzard. He got $40. He did not get $50. But he made what I look at as a sort of a feminist statement. He made a statement that says, my wife was valuable to the farm. I, as a farmer, have 2 young children. With her dead, I cannot do my farm work because I have nobody to watch my children. I have no family in the area. I need help from the state. My wife was valuable. But he did not get the full 50. But he probably didn't know he was making a feminist statement, but I see it as that. Some of the parents, if they lost their like teenage sons, applied, and some of them got money and some did not.
How did you find this information out?
Yeah, so the state of Minnesota, the process for going to get money, each county had a liaison. It was like a local businessman or the county recorder, county treasurer. They were working with the state. The victim's family would come and fill out a form, an affidavit, a sworn statement, a form saying my husband died in the storm, these are the details, I have no money. The goal for this money to be distributed, the $5,000, was to destitute families. You had to be destitute in order to get the money. You couldn't have a few dollars over here or over there. And so the person that needed the money would go to the liaison in the county. They'd fill out the forms, and they would be sent off. And there would be cover letters with these forms. And I actually, when we get to one of the victims, I have a form to pass out to you that will show that. There was a cover letter. So in the cover letter from the county recorder, the county treasurer, they would say, this family is destitute, please help them. And those documents are all at the Minnesota Historical Society. Governor Horace Austin, and I've got his picture here, there he is. He started this. He and the state legislature agreed that $5,000 would be available. From what I can tell, only 3,300 or 3,400 was actually dispersed, not all of the 5,000. So there are even some people that didn't get any money, but they did not disperse all of it. So those papers are available for you to look at. The applications are there, the affidavits are there from the family. The cover letters are there. There were a few missing documents that I couldn't find in the folders, like there might be a missing affidavit, but I find in a ledger later that yes, they did get money. There was a ledger that was kept, I think it was, so they would list the people, and I'll have an example of that later on when I talk about specific, some of the victims from Lyon County. So anyway, those documents are there, and it made, that's one of the reasons I could do the book that I did, because this information is there with some quotes I've got one quote coming up pretty soon for you of what people thought about this project or about the people asking for money. So when you read the book, pay attention to some of the ripple effects and the secondary stories that I don't go into a lot of detail with, but just to make note of these things. First off, this is an immigration story. Of the 84 deaths, 66 were immigrants, mostly Norway and Sweden. Only one victim was born in Minnesota, and that was a little baby about 2 weeks old. She froze in her bed. Her father also froze to death. Don't know what he was doing, but my guess is he was probably getting firewood because the house was so cold and they needed firewood. The others, the 16, 17, were migrants coming from New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Ohio, just from a variety of states coming in. Homestead land was available in Minnesota, and a lot of people were coming here for that land. Most of the people here in the book that died were homesteaders, or they were about to, they were soon to go to get the application in, but didn't quite get there yet. But this is an immigration story. And how many people coming from Norway, they know snow, but do they know Minnesota winters, blizzards? And I think some of them just didn't have the experience, and so it was very difficult. Some of them died just months after arriving here. This is like their first winter. Just very, very sad. Some of the other interesting stories would be like second marriages. Many of the women married again, not all of them. Many of the men married again, especially if there were children involved. But even some of the women with children didn't get married again. So it's just a variety of things. the book begins with the deaths, and then I have the amputees. The records at Minnesota include the amputees as well, and there are some fascinating reads in there. So you can look at life as an amputee, one of them being Marjorie McCoy Timms. She was on her honeymoon. She had just married in Canada, coming back with her husband and father-in-law, and they die on the prairies. This is up in Otter Tail County before she even gets to the farm. Literally, hadn't even gotten there yet. She survives, marries again, and her second husband dies in a farm accident. You know, deaths on the prairie from one thing or another, whether it's natural disasters, accidents, disease. Later down here I talk about illnesses. Diphtheria and typhoid are part of the story. People will survive. One of them, Candioi County, Lars Nelson dies. His widow is pregnant at the time. And Lewis Nelson is born, and about 4 or 5 years later, he dies from typhoid. Not only Lewis, but an older sister on the same day. So this woman has lost her husband, and within 4 years has lost 2 of her children. Oh, it's just sad. The book talks a lot about homesteads because I do talk about where they live. I try to identify where in the township they live. Most of them I've identified. There are a few people that I haven't been able to identify where within the township, but most of them I know where they lived. Grasshoppers come into the story with Stina and Eliza, Steve Anderson in Cleveland. So that information is in there because the grasshoppers come soon. In this area, in the southwest part of the state, they arrive in 1873. My area in Candioi County, they're like 75, 76, or a little bit later, because it takes a couple of seasons as they're going along, like 3 seasons of crops are wiped out by the grasshoppers. So they, I should back up. The state of Minnesota also helped those affected by grasshoppers. They didn't give out cash like they did for the blizzard people, but they gave, you could apply to get seed for planting. And you would just go to the local train station and there were shipments made, and then you could pick up your seed. So that's how the state helped the grasshoppers, people affected by the grasshoppers. And another is, just to recognize that, this is Dakota land. You guys know this. And just to honor and to remember and acknowledge that. There are about 8 or 10 of the farmers that are on former reservation land along the Minnesota River. Whether they knew they were on reservation land, probably not. They just knew they could get a homestead. People have asked me, did any Dakota die in the blizzard? And I looked for that, and I did not find it. For a couple of reasons, I think. First off, after 1862, they were expelled. There were just very few Dakota in Minnesota. They had been pushed out to the Dakota Territory and Nebraska, so they just weren't here. They had started to come back gradually in the 1870s, and more and more would come later. And I think the second reason is they were experienced with Minnesota blizzards. They knew how to survive. Again, immigrants probably didn't have the knowledge or the experience of blizzards, but the native tribes did. So I think that's another reason that if they were in a blizzard, they could survive. So those are my 2 theories. There may be other reasons. I did find one young teenager who died in a blizzard in January, but it was 2 weeks after this blizzard. So fascinating story in that his father was white and his grandfather was white. His mother was Dakota and his grandmother was Ojibwe. And the 2 men were translators for the military. And the grandfather during the 1862 war. And he was killed at some point. I don't remember the details. But that was also a fascinating little read. I wanted the story about Quinn in this book, and then I find out it was 2 weeks later. So not in the book. And then one of the topics is morality of the 1870s. And I'm going to read you this. So I remember I told you that to get the money, you had to go to the liaison. The liaisons write letters to the states to go with the application to say this person is destitute, multiple kids, they need money. Well, here is, let me find this one. This is Maria Jensen, Mrs. Tufva, also known as Theodore. This is from Dr. R.M. Reynolds in Otter Tail County. Dr. Reynolds wrote March 2nd, 1873 to the governor's office, and quote, "In regard to Mrs. Theodore Jensen, I would only say that she has again entered into the holy bonds of wedlock before even the body of her late husband has been found. She has not the sympathy of the neighbors, and I do not think the government need assist her." No state aid was given to the widow. So it says that she was already married again in March. And she did not remarry until June. And she had a 2-year-old. So she loses her husband in the blizzard, destitute. What do you do? What do you do? You make decisions that you maybe normally wouldn't make. But we don't know why she made certain decisions, but my guess is because she had that little 2-year-old, she needed to do something. And she ends up marrying again. Stephen Zutz, he married in April. He had those 2 kids. He married even sooner than Maria did, but he gets money. So anyway, a little bit, some version of morality, at least some people's version of morality in the time. So, okay. And the other thing, we got military veterans, so there's some stories about that. And then people helping each other. Sort of pay attention because there are little statements like, this family's destitute, but the neighbors are feeding them right now. Just little comments like that help, to realize people are in community and people will help other people in need. Oh, the military veterans. Sorry, I forgot a little story there. I'm filled with stories about these people that died. Rufus Small, and this is Nobles County. So Nobles County, and maybe your area, I'm not sure, they had a lot of Civil War people coming in. They have an active GAR at that time. So Rufus Small dies in the blizzard, and I will find it and read it to you rather than just explaining it to you. It's worth. Okay. So there's the GAR. They do a military funeral for him. The funeral ceremonies of the deceased Mr. Small were conducted by the Grand Army of the Republic on Tuesday at this place. This is Nobles County. There was a large attendance of members of Stoddard Post and other citizens, and all the impressive ceremonies of the military burial were observed. The guard of honor, martial music with muffled drums, colors draped with black, and the reading of the burial service. And now some other information from the liaison who wrote to the state. The widow and 5 children of Mr. Small, who are entirely destitute, are at present supported by the charities of their neighbors. At the time of his death, the children were destitute of shoes. In fact, the family could not attend his funeral on account of not having sufficient clothing. And that's just, breaks my heart when you think about it, that he had this military funeral and she and the children could not attend. Yeah. I can't imagine what's going through her mind. And no shoes in the middle of winter. That's just another one, no shoes. So another of the big secondary stories are the pregnant widows. These are the ones that I've identified as having children, being pregnant at the time. And I went into this thinking, they'll never use the word pregnant, but they did. Mrs. Christopherson is pregnant, and the other one is, far gone in pregnancy. The others use these euphemisms, about to be confined in a family way, to be delivered of a child. So I just found that interesting as well. But again, what would you do? You've lost your husband and you're pregnant and you probably have other children. The difficulties, the ripple effects, the secondary stories of these families. And one of the big issues I had was the spelling of names. Especially Norwegian, if you've got a Norwegian background, you've got the patronymic name and you've got a farm name. And they use the patronymic name and the farm name, and then they go like this. They got Sonsen. It was mind-boggling. And the O'Neills, I spelt with one L. And they're Renville County, but they died in Candioi County. I spelt it with one L, and one of the descendants contacted me, and she was very gracious, but she said, it's 2 L's. And I said, I'm so sorry. I had to make a decision and then be consistent, and I obviously chose the wrong one. You know, I look at documents, how many times would they spell it with one L and how many times they spell it with two L's? You know, such is life. And my maiden name is two L's, and I know what it's like to be spelled with one. You know, yeah, it bothers me. So I know what they mean, and all I could do was say, I'm sorry. Johannes Roers and Naset. I had two victims, Johannes Roers and Naset and John Robinson. They're all like, this is Grant County or Douglas County. It took me a while to realize they're the same person. They're the Norwegian version and the American version. And once I realized they were the same person, it all made sense. All the information I had made sense. Part of the problem is bad handwriting that gets transcribed incorrectly, so I have to weed through that. One of the worst ones was for the victim Pribanow. So this is the little baby that froze in her bed and her father. In census data and other information, it's one of them was spelled Bruelrau and Privnarva. You know, trying to figure those out. So my stories could go on and on about trying to weed through this. Hagermeyer was really Jacob Herkenrath. You know, I had no first name for Hagermeyer. I just had Hagermeyer, the blacksmith, and it was Jacob Herkenrath. And I got that through church records at the Diocese of St. Cloud. They had the name right there. Once I explained what I was looking for, and they had the name right there, and he was a blacksmith in Elizabethtown, and you know, yeah. So yeah, almost everybody had a spelling issue, and just tried to be consistent when I made a decision. The information in this includes homesteads. Homestead documents, if you're not aware, are available at the National Archives. I used to volunteer at the National Archives. I used to live in DC for 12 years, or one of the Maryland suburbs, and volunteered there. You can go to the National Archives and look at the homestead documents, or you can order them online. You can go to archives.gov, and in the lower left corner, it's like order copies. And later on, with one of the victims, I'll show you what information you need. So there's homestead information in here. So I have each of the persons presented with sort of bullet points, a template. Name, birth, if they were married and had children, that's included. If they're a veteran, that's included. Then their residence, where they lived. And I include, you know, if they moved from Fillmore County here or somewhere else, I would include that. And sometimes I included then what happened to the widow or the widower, did they marry again, that kind of thing. Then I get into what's the journey in the storm, what happened to them. And in those times, I quote newspapers and county historical societies, lots of quotes in here, information at the state level, the governor's papers, as to what happened. Because sometimes the stories don't all agree. There might be little variations here and there, like where the body was found or what they were doing out in the storm. And I could determine which was correct. So I would include all of them that I found, which made the book a little thicker. And I did it for a second reason. I thought, if you're a descendant of one of these victims, you may want to know all the places that your great-great-grandfather was written up about. That, oh my gosh, there are 5 different newspapers that have a story about his death, or just 2 newspapers, or 1. But you know, descendants may not know that, and so there's a little bit of resource for that. And then at the end, I put down where they're buried, and if I could find that. Most of the times I figured that out. And then I have an Adventures in Research, where I have these little quirky little things that I might have found, interesting little tidbits that don't fit the other narratives, but you might be interested in knowing something. Some of it's geography, like, oh, Lake Segal no longer exists. It was drained, but at the time of the blizzard, there was the lake. Things like that. And there were tidbits that I found interesting. There's one of them, I mentioned this Jens Strand. He became a minister, that, you know, where the title of this book came from. He has served in many parishes, and he goes to, I'm drawing a blank on the county, I think it was Cottonwood, not Cottonwood, somewhere else, I can't remember. Anyway, he goes to a parish, and at the parish is the widow of somebody else in the storm, that died in the storm. And I'm thinking, okay, he's introducing himself to people. Okay, Mrs. Smith, I understand you're a widow, tell me about your husband. Well, he died in the blizzard of January 1873. And then Jens, the pastor, would say, oh, my father died in the same blizzard. And so those kinds of little crossover stories I included in here. And there's lots of different examples for Adventures in Research. And some of it's how I found out the person's name, what I did in research to figure this out. The homestead file, again, we're back to homestead. The homestead proof. will tell information about the farm, because when they apply for the homestead, and most of these are the widows that are completing the homesteads, they have to provide information about the farm and what improvements they've done. So they farmed, they have plowed 20 acres, they have fenced 40 acres. They have a well, they have a stable, they have a house that is a 10 by 14, 1.5 stories, 3 windows, and 1 door, and a solid, good roof. So you can get some information about what the farm looked like in its very early years. Okay, now we finally get to the Lyon County victims. I'm sorry, I've done all this this other information for you, and now we can spend some time talking about your victims. Marvin Chase was related to Lauren Fox. Lauren Fox's mother was a Chase. He's not a nephew, I couldn't find him as a cousin, but there's some relation, but I couldn't figure it out. Winona Fox was the daughter of Lauren Fox, and she's age 3 when she dies in the storm. And there's Asla Olson, and then a Miss Olson. I never did find a first name. I have very limited information there. And then we have one injured person, Theodore Dickinson, who possibly lived in Monroe Township. Some things are a little vague, so now we'll look a little closer. All right, so the Fox family and Marvin Chase were living in Lind Township. So the red squares mark their 2 homesteads. The 2 men applied for the homesteads on the same day. The green circle is where they died, basically, somewhere in there. They had been to Redwood County to visit friends, and they were on their way home, and they get caught in the blizzard. This one, of course, says that they applied for their homesteads on the same day, and both applications were canceled in 1874. Marvin Chase was not married. Lauren Fox was, but the widow did not complete the homestead. So this is one of the most important finds the important documents that I found in this, working on this and trying to identify where they lived because of the incomplete, the canceled homesteads. If you look at the far right, it'll say Lauren Fox and Marvin Chase. So they're right next to each other. We're in section 2, which doesn't show up in what I copied here. And then the second line, this actually is a continuation. It's all one big long ledger. And it's that the cancellation dates are November 1st. The application dates are November 1st in 71 and canceled in 1874. So now the Fox family story. They were found on Saturday. And let me read you the story, or just a brief. This is from the Wabasha Herald. The storm of the past few days has been very severe and proved fatal to many. This morning, the bodies of Mr. Marvin H. Chase and a little daughter of Mr. Fox were found frozen to death within 18.5 miles of this place. Mr. and Mrs. Fox were with them, but were yet living when found. Mr. Fox is very badly frozen and is not expected to live. Mrs. Fox will probably recover. The Fox family and Mr. Chase had been lying on the prairie since Tuesday noon. The young man, Mr. Chase, died on Wednesday morning, his head lying on the lap of Mrs. Fox. The little girl died yesterday morning. Mrs. Fox, its mother, says she thinks it died of starvation. Yeah, just very, very sad. So this is one of from Stillwater Messenger, just one of the stories about them. But I want to draw your attention to the very top, which I've got listed some interesting information here. Another person in the storm, 65 hours in a snowbank and 69 hours without food. Sort of put yourself in the situation of a 3-day blizzard, no food, no shelter. Yeah, and that was from a person from Redwood County, the treasurer, Robinson. So his story is in the survivor section. So I've got the deaths, I've got the amputations, and I've got survivor stories. I must say, my initial goal was just the dead people. And then I started looking at the documents at the State Historical Society, the governor's papers, about the people who had the amputations and applied for their $25. And there's details about the medical care they received and the money that was reimbursed to the hospitals or to the doctors. And it was fascinating. One of the stories was like 18 yards of carpeting replaced. You know, I'm like, what happened to that carpeting? Was that blood? Was it just wheelchair marks that wore out? I don't know. That's Christian Haig's story in here. It's like, yeah. Another one's like whiskey is listed. You know, obviously they were using, you know. And Katie Ott, you know, what was it? 79 times her dressing was changed on her feet. She didn't have the amputations yet. The doctor had changed the dressing on her feet 79 times over the course of like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And it didn't help. She ended up having amputations. And she died from diphtheria about 7 years later. So, yeah. Anyway, so after those very difficult sections, you know, and as I'm doing research, I'm finding all these other stories of people that survived. Most people survived the blizzard. Not everybody died. And so I included some of the stories of those who survived, whether they just took refuge in a hotel, followed a path, followed a fence, used a rope, whatever it was. And there's a couple humorous ones in there. I'll just say Muskrat Lodge as a hint for you. Yeah. But I just knew that I needed to end the book a little bit lighter, lighten the mood a little bit. And they're fascinating stories. So, all right, now Asla Olsen. He was getting firewood with a man named Knut Olsen. And Knut was from Murray County. Asla was from the very southern part of Monroe Township. I could not identify the farms for either. Neither of these had applied for homesteads. But it's somewhere in those areas of the boxes. Lake Segal, if I'm saying it correctly, no longer exists, but that's where they were getting firewood. So it all happened somewhere in there. Now, were Knut and Asla related, even though they've got slightly different spellings? I looked for that, and these are Norwegian immigrants, and they were not brothers. And a descendant of Knut, of Knut contacted me after he got the book, and he said, I believe that they are related through Knut's wife. So, but that was right before I was heading out here, so I haven't pursued that to see if they were brother and sister. I'm not sure. So they, anyway, so the farms have not been, the specifics of the farms have not been identified. Knut died in Chetek Township, and Asla died by his farm. They both died by their farms, somewhere in that area. I never like having, without having an exact answer. These incomplete things sort of drive me crazy. Life of a researcher. Okay, now, this is the affidavit, and this is what I've got copies for you. So I'm just going to send these around for you to look at. You can pass them down, and hopefully we've got enough for everybody here. Or take one, or maybe one per family. I better keep one. Oh, I can look at the screen. There you go.
So did you get lots of contact from relatives now that the book has been published?
I've had a few people contact me. Yep.
That you didn't have contact with before?
Right. Yep. One of the things that I did to help publicize this, I went to people who had trees on Ancestry and contacted them saying, your ancestor on your tree, you know, I've written a book and your ancestor died in this blizzard and just want to let you know the book's available. And some of them have contacted me and said, I bought the book, or I'm going to buy the book, or thank you so much for doing this. And then a couple of other times they've provided information. Was one. While I was working on the book, I did contact some people that had trees. If they had a really good tree and I had a gap of information that the County Historical Society didn't have an answer for, I couldn't find answers for, and I would contact them. But that was 84 deaths, and contacting people, it was a little beyond my organizational skills. I mean, I'm organized, but that was a little beyond. You know, like you introduced yourself to me earlier, and I had a little blank. Like, I know we've corresponded, and it took me a while, and you were gracious to let me know what about who. This has been an organizational challenge for me, keeping this all straight. So yeah. So now Christy Olsen. So this is the wife of Knut. So she is the person that went to the liaison. She signed it down at the bottom, but she did not fill out. She probably did not fill out the information. probably somebody else did. And this one actually reads very clearly compared to some of those that I've got. So it gives information as to where her husband was, where he died. And when it says town, and then they give the township range number, or it might have said the township name. When they say town, that's language for township back in this time period, not like a village or a city. They're referring to townships. And then it says they lost an ox. They list the children and their ages, approximately. The deceased was 32 years old. So they give clues as to information about the deceased and about the family. And then it says at the bottom, the widow of said Olson is living on a preemption right and has no breaking done on the claim, and is living in a very small sod or sad, I'm not really sure, shanty. I think it's sod, probably a sod house. So he had not applied for a homestead yet. He's probably about to, but squatting on some land, and then they were going to get to the land office probably in the spring or something and apply, and it just didn't happen. So it doesn't say exactly where they live. But she signs her name. There are some signatures where it's just an X, and then the person filling out the form puts their name down with a notation that the X is the signature of the person applying. And it says that they have fuel to last 2 months, which is the firewood. Food to last, usually firewood. It could also be twisted straw and grass, because they did that as well. Seeing around the prairie, wood is harder to find, so they'll twist up grasses. Let's see here. Here we go. So this is a line from the ledger book. After this process was over, they created this ledger. And so it just says E. Olson, obviously it's Osla, but the names, issues. Lyon County, the township, frozen to death. 1 ox was also frozen. Wife and 2 children, very poor. One of them had, destitute. Another one says in debt. So again, they're trying to prove that these people are worthy of getting that $50. And so she received $50. It was dispersed in April to E. Lamb, mailed to E. Lamb in the county. And then Lamb, it would be up to Lamb to get the money to her. So now Miss Olson, don't know much about her. I've got the location, the homestead in section 4. There's one story with no name for Lyon County. She was just out doing some farm work, getting hay, I think it was. And I had no other story to put it to, no other woman. It was a woman, and this is the one I've got. So I've put it there, but with a clarification in the book that this could be her story. So her father was listed in the ledger book. Ole Olson, Lyon, we've got the township and range. And down here it says, daughter of above. No first name, just daughter of above, all frozen to death. The father had 1 foot amputated, but he never applied for any $25 of aid. So I don't have him in the amputations. Only those that received aid I had to limit. I had to come up some sort of limit. And so he did not. But too many Ole Olsons to follow to try to figure out what happened to him and to find out who the daughter may be of, like in an earlier census. That was a dead end. But no money went to for either of them. All right, so now this is Ole Olson. He applied for a homestead. And so if you want to get homestead information, the red boxes are what you need to provide. And it's record group 49. I forgot to put that up there in red. You need to say that it's state of Minnesota, or if you've got somebody in North Dakota or South Dakota, you need the state. You need the land office name, in this case Redwood Falls. You need to note that it's a homestead, and that is, it could be a cash sale, it could be a land grant, scrip warrant. There's other land patents that people had. And you need the document number. This information, this white sheet, that's all available online at glowrecords.blm.gov. So GLO for Government Land Office Records at bureauoflandmanagement.gov. So you can get this information on your computer, and then submit your request either online or go to the National Archives. But they are all using township and range numbers in these, so you sort of need to know township and range and how that works. All right, so now Theodore Dixon. He was injured in the blizzard, and he was military. So there's a whole other set of files at the National Archives that might be of interest to people. So he got a pension, a soldier's invalid pension of $12 per month because he was injured. And he started getting the pension in 1890. So this is an index. You can find this like on Ancestry.com. And also these microfilm. But these databases are available at the National Archives as well. So this is Theodore Dickinson, and it says that he served in the U.S. Veterans Volunteer Engineers. The certificate number. So you've got his application number. He applied in 1888, and it has an application number, and it was approved. And that's the main number that you need if you're wanting to look at the file. So this is one of the sheets of paper in that file. And then up on top, penalties for fraudulent claim. So, they don't want, these are sworn statements, and, they're going to be on you they will investigate to make sure everything is accurate. But what's interesting here is they include his parents' names, place and date of birth, death date, location, and burial up in International Falls. Father's name, mother's name. Was he ever married? Yes. Mary Elizabeth Dickinson is the wife. So there's genealogical information in these files. Oh, let me go back. If this one doesn't have the example, but there are times if the veteran dies, then the widow can get, you see you've got invalid and then widow and then minor. The widow then can apply for his pension. But, and that's when the files get interesting. I said I volunteered at the National Archives. I was part of the project of processing these files. They can be this thick or they can be this thick with documentation. And it's when it's the widows getting the pension that they become interesting. Because the widow has to prove he was a soldier. Well, there's going to be military records, so that's not usually hard. They have to prove that he died, so there's going to be some death information in there. We already saw that one statement. There's going to be the death information, and then she has to prove that she was married to him. This is before there's any county records keeping documentation. And so there's statements from pastors, there's statements from witnesses, there's maybe a page out of the family Bible, any sort of documentation they could come up with, multiple documentations. They're not just going to believe one letter, I was at the wedding. They're going to need multiple people saying they're at the wedding. So it becomes an interesting file. In this case, she did not. I don't know if she died before him. I'm not drawing a blank, but she did not apply. And if the soldier dies, if the widow remarries, she's no longer eligible. She loses the pension. If the second husband then dies, she can reapply for the pension. So there's more paperwork proving that the second husband, she was married, and that second husband died. You can see how the files can get very thick, up to like 200 pages sometimes. And if the soldier has died, the widow is ineligible because she's remarried, but there's a minor child. The minor child the mother or the guardian can apply for the minor child. So there'll be another set of numbers. So these files can get very, very big and filled with lots of genealogy. All right, we went that one. Okay, so I guess we're going to step backwards a little bit to a letter that was sent about Dickinson. And this is a letter with only one period in it, no punctuation. So I'm going to read it to you without the punctuation. I am sent, this is from the doctor in New Ulm. I am sent for to amputate a foot for Dickinson, 80 miles west. Frozen in late storm, poor and wants help his family. Shall I go and receive pay from state? Take 4 or 5 days. Poor roads. Where is Evan's answer today? Yeah, no punctuation. So in the book, I do put in punctuation, and I make a notation that for ease of reading, I have added punctuation or spelling changes or something. This is an example of one of the problems one of the challenges of doing research, reading letters from 100 plus years ago, whether it's the handwriting. The other thing that they did, and is you hyphenate, you're at the end of a sentence and you hyphenate and you continue on. They would split the word without the hyphen, and I'm like, wait. So I had this letter that was interesting. I don't remember who it was for. And I had these two words and I couldn't figure out what they were. So I let it sit for weeks or months and come back to it. All of a sudden it dawns on me, oh my gosh, it's one word, not two separate words. It didn't make any sense. Because I couldn't read the letters to begin with. In addition to being not hyphenated, I couldn't read the cursive very clearly. So I didn't have all the right letters. Anyway, mystery solved at some point down the road. That was an Alleluia day in the household. But I won't let that kind of thing go. I've got to figure it out. So this just gives you an idea of the type of document, the language at the time, and the lack of punctuation at the time, at least for this person. All right. So were there more than 84 deaths? Possibly. I mean, I've identified 84, but I can't say that's a definitive number. There's a section in the book called Quandaries and Clarifications. The quandaries are the incomplete names that a newspaper may have written. One of them was Hubert died in the blizzard. And I think the county was named Hubert from such county. Well, is that a first name or a last name? The county historical society didn't have a record of this. So that's but maybe he did die in the blizzard. And there are other names like that, where I would just have a first name or a last name. And remember I talked about Stephen Zutz with the feminist statement? So Henrietta Zutz died in the blizzard. She was not listed in the newspaper as Henrietta Zutz. She was listed as the German woman from Wisner's Grove. and then listed as Mrs. Switzy, didn't have a first name, didn't have a last name, but you could sort of tell the style of the last name. It was going to be German. She was German. So I tried to figure this out. Of course, this is during COVID. I'm home. It's 2020, and I'm doing all my research, 2020, 2021. And most historical societies are closed, but some of them will be available to answer an email. They may do some research for me, so I was very grateful for that. So Wisner's Grove is in Faribault County. So I'm contacting, by now, Randy and I have gone through a few conversations. Yeah?
I lived at Wisner Grove.
Oh, wow. Wow. Would you have known if I said the German woman from Wisner's Grove? Would you have known?
My grandpa settled there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Back in the 1800s.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my mother and dad lived there, and I lived.
Wow. Good. Well, I had to figure out where Wisner's Grove was, but maps help. And then the County Historical Society confirmed where that was. So now I'm trying to figure out who she is. And Randy at Faribault County Historical Society, I asked, do you have any blizzard deaths? I give the date. Do you have any names? And he says, no, we don't have anybody that he knows about. Okay, so I'm going to try to figure this out. I said, well, I'll let you know if I get any leads, and then maybe my leads will help you, blah, blah, blah. So I know she's German. She's probably a German immigrant. She has 2 children. Her story is in the newspaper, so she has 2 young children. She leaves one at home. Oh, husband is gone, he's traveling. She leaves one child at home to go and get the other child at the neighbor's. Now the neighbor could be a quarter mile away or half a mile away, probably not right next door. She dies in this journey to get the other child, leaving one child home alone for about 2 more days. Yikes.
When did she live there?
1873. So she's one of the victims of the blizzard. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out her name, but I have a little bit of the story, so I start going through census data. And I'm looking for something like Switzy. It's a German area. I start going through the census. Oh my gosh, all sorts of Lutzes in the area. Maybe she's a Lutz. Every woman I find in 1870 census is alive in 1875 or 1880, so that doesn't help. Then I know which township Wisner's Grove was in. So I'm just focusing on that township. And then I find Stephen Zutz. And this is the 1880 census. And he's married with many children and a wife. And the wife was born in the United States. The 2 oldest children were born in Germany. I think I found the person. And so I contact Randy back at Faribault. And I said, what do you know about Stephen Zutz family? And he's got like a card file of deaths, but it's just arranged by name. He looks up Zutz. Henrietta Zutz died January 7th, 1873. We've got her figured out. And so there's hallelujahs on both ends of the telephone at that point. And then, Minnesota Historical Society has been closed, so I can't get to the records there. No, they're not even at that point helping via email. There's just nothing yet. So Minnesota Historical Society finally opens up. I get to look at the logbook. Henrietta Zutz is in the logbook. They had her name. So if I would have just had the log, it would have saved me a lot of time. But which was more fun? Digging out and trying to figure this out, even though I'm looking at census, but I get to talk to Randy at Faribault, I liked that option rather than just having the name given to me. As a researcher, I like the challenge. And I've got other stories about figuring out names, but yeah, that was the most fun. Another reason for there could be 84 deaths, more than 84. County death records, these counties were just getting established, as Jennifer was talking earlier. The county recorder's office weren't always established in some of the counties, or they were, not everybody knew they had to give information about a death to the county recorder. So there's going to be missing deaths. Somebody might have died and they buried him very quickly without letting a doctor know, without letting officials know. It could have happened. Another thing, in the book, I've got 3 deaths that happened 2 weeks later. They died from their injuries. They had amputations. One died from lockjaw. One just died in the hospital. And another refused his amputations and got gangrene. So they were victims of the blizzard. They did not die in the blizzard, but they were victims of the blizzard. And there may be more than this. One of the people that I came across in Iowa, I initially thought it was a Minnesota story, but it ended up being an Iowa story. And that's a whole nother story, but it's actually in here under quandaries and clarifications. He died several months later from pneumonia. He just never recovered from the blizzard. So, he's not a Minnesota death, but it just shows you there could have been other deaths down the road from pneumonia. And, there was no way I would be able to know that was a blizzard-caused pneumonia or just pneumonia. So there could be definitely more people. I just, did what I could. My clarifications section includes people that were identified as dying in this 3-day blizzard of January 1873. There was another 3-day blizzard in February 1872. And those people get mixed up into the 1873. A 3-day blizzard, it must be January 1873, but in reality it's 1872. I had Murray County, I had a father and son that had been written up as dying in this blizzard. In reality, when I got to the homestead documents, the wife is completing the homestead and she's filling out the form, and why are you here, Mrs. Johnson, and not your husband? Well, he died in a blizzard. February 13th, 1872 is written in the form. So I had to pull those out because I trust that she would know when her husband and her son died in a blizzard versus somebody reminiscing many decades later about people who died in blizzards. So I've got a lot of those clarifications in there. We're close, part of Lincoln County pulls out of Lyon County. The Lincoln County history book, Arthur Rose, writes, 3 Taylor men died in 1873 blizzard, in the January 1873 blizzard. And this is the one that caused me more problems than anything. It ultimately was none of the 3 Taylor men died in this blizzard. One died in 1875, one died in 1872 blizzard, which is a whole nother story. And I think his body was found in 1873. I think that's where the mix-up was. And the other person in the family, he died in 1870 with his body found in 1878. When people are thinking back decades later, people can get numbers mixed up, dates mixed up, it was that big 3-day blizzard, blah, blah, blah. So those are just some of the things that lead me to believe that there could be more people in this blizzard. I've identified these 84. So do any of you have questions? I know I've already addressed a couple questions as been going on. Yeah?
In one of the very first screenings up there, you had this Marie, that was the first day.
Marie
and
Jensen.
And you said she married, was it a few months after the death of her husband?
Yeah.
And sometimes this causes questions. My question would be, when you take a person like that who had a rough start to begin with. Have you ever tried to follow them from then until now, or their family from then until now, to see how things turned out?
Oh, I did not go in that depth. I tried to follow what happened to the widow. And, oh my gosh, it's one of these stories that I did not, I think it's somebody here. Let me look at my, Marvin Chase. Oh, Lauren Fox's widow, I think. I think it's the one. Okay, let me tell you what happened to Mary Fox, the widow, and trying to figure this one out. So this is trying to figure out, this is trying to figure out her maiden name. Anyway, it led, okay, yeah, this is trying to figure out her maiden name, because I tried to identify the wife and the birth and death dates, the maiden name, and any future marriages. So this is what happened to her. This is what I wrote. This is in the Adventures in Research. This is how this fits into that, in that section. Widow Mary's life after Lauren's death was not easy to determine. I had a suggested birthplace of Virginia from a census document, but no definitive maiden name. She did not appear in the 1875 Minnesota census or the 1880 federal census in Lyon County. Her daughter Virginia, this is the surviving daughter, there was one that died and there was a surviving daughter, Virginia, was with her paternal grandmother in Warren County, Pennsylvania by the time of the 1880 census. And earlier I talked about the family, the Fox coming from Warren County, Pennsylvania to Lyon County. There is a Redwood County marriage record for Mary Fox and Ole P. Halls for 1874. So this is probably her, but could there be another woman with the same name? Redwood County borders Lyon County, but is this the correct Mary Fox? Soon after the wedding, the couple left this Redwood County homestead and moved to Mills County, Iowa. They had several children. The death record of their daughter Ella Halls Buffington provided a maiden name for her mother, Mary Ann Sanders. So now I've got the maiden name. Born in Virginia. Fox was Mary's maiden name at the time of this 1874 marriage to Halls, and she was a widow of a man named Fox. O.P. Halls died in 1888, leaving Mary a widow for the second time. A widow with at least 3 children under the age of 8. And on March 13, 1893, she married William H. Williams, a farmer from Glenwood Mills County, Iowa. This Pottawatomie County, Iowa marriage record, they married in a different county, confirms her maiden name, Mary Ann Sanders, daughter of Alfred and Mary Cook Sanders. The marriage record also notes that Mary had 2 previous marriages. William Williams married again in 1897, so it's probable that Mary died before 1897. No burial location for Mary Saunders Fox Halls Williams has been identified. So just trying to track what happened to the widow was going through the daughter of the second marriage and then looking at records and coming up with maiden names. And there's a few others like that. These widows would marry, a husband dies in building a barn and dies in an accident doing that. But I did not pursue what happened to the families generations later. Any other questions?
Well, the mental anguish, you wonder how many of them suffered mental illness of some kind.
Or post-traumatic stress syndrome, as we call it now. Being in that blizzard for 3 days, what happened? What happens to them? And one of them, so there's the victim, Mr. Townsend, and never had a first name. This was Hennepin County, but he dies in Dakota County. The widow, Mary, they say she went crazy. But that's terminology from the time period. Does that, she was maybe just excessively crying. Or did she really go crazy? So it's hard to know, but that's the language they used. That was the one that frustrated me as well. Like long story as to what they were doing in Dakota County and how he died, but no first name. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, if you have questions later, please come up to me and you can ask me individually. I am selling my books. They are $20 a piece. And so if you want to learn more about these and, read these stories about deaths, amputations, and some lighter stories about survival, please let me know. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your attention and your interest in this blizzard. I really appreciate it.